All right, I see that we have several attendees and it is time. Hello everyone, thank you for joining DataCon LA 2020. Welcome to the Data Infrastructure and Security track. Soon we'll be listening to the session Data Privacy and Security by Design with Lisa Rapp. I am Nilesh Tiloda, your host, and our co-host today is Sachin Nahar. We will be moderating the chat and Q&A for you during this session. Our guest Lisa will be talking about data privacy and security by design. So without further ado, I'll hand this over to the speaker. Thanks for being here, Lisa.
Thank you very much. First of all, hello and welcome. I'm excited to spend the next 40 minutes with each of you, so thank you for joining. Just to do a couple of housekeeping items really quickly, as you probably already know, the presentation will be about 30 minutes, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for questions at the end. If you're wanting to submit questions, please do so via the WOVA app. And again, just as we've already kind of mentioned, we're going to spend the next kind of 40 minutes together having a conversation about privacy. Why is it important, and what are some tactical ways your organization can, implement privacy? To give you a little bit about myself, I am Lisa Rapp, and I'm the Vice President of Data Ethics at LiveRamp. I've been around data and technology for approximately 20 years. I've done everything from build identity products and data quality products, to running a line of business, to selling products, to being a subject matter expert, to program management of those, and now securing the safe use of data within products. What has been the one consistent throughout these 20 years is the use of data, and the use of data to drive results and to differentiate the companies and products and services that I've been involved in. So just really quickly, kind of who is LiveRamp? We are a company based in San Francisco, California, and we are a leading data connectivity platform that makes data accessible and meaningful. So what does that really mean? To kind of break it down a little bit is we allow our clients to share, connect, and purchase data in ways that are safe to reach their markets and their audience. And how do we actually do that? We do that by having a robust and iterative privacy program, which is kind of what we'll get into over the next couple of minutes. So let me go ahead and share my screen with y'all. And we can go ahead and get started. So before we really dive deep in, I want to kind of level set a little bit about data. So when I am referring to data throughout this next 40 minutes in this conversation, there's lots of different types of data out there. But when I'm referring to data here, I'm actually referring specifically to data associated with an individual or data associated with a household. So when we're talking about that today, talking today about data, that's what we're talking about, and we're talking about the best practices surrounding that use of data. So there's, as I mentioned, lots of different types of data, but personal data is really what the industry is caring a lot about, especially in the digital economy. And so personal data is information like your email address, your phone number, your name, and postal information. You can think of it as your IP address. But it's also broader than that in the sense of not just being personally identifiable, but personal information. And then you also have to think about linkability. So for instance, your company may be taking in information or have information that by itself seems very benign or seems non-personal. However, you might have a lot of this information in various silos, and you might be taking it in through log data or exhaust data or other avenues from applications that you're doing analytics or things on. And what you might start to find is that if you link the IP address to transaction data, to a timestamp, that all of a sudden what you are seeing is something that becomes very unique and could definitely identify an individual over time. In fact, there's been studies that have shown that, with just about like 12 elements of data, you can almost identify every single adult within the United States. And I would contend actually that you could probably go down to somewhere between 3 and 5 pieces of data and actually get over 80% of the population just by that little amount of data in there. So as we get started, I want to kind of make 3 major call outs or truths as I see them as for why I think, privacy should be top of mind for anyone who's in business today. The first one I will say is that data is not going away. In fact, in the past 3 years, more data was created than in the previous 100 years. We operate in an information economy where data is basically considered like black gold. And in fact, some would argue data is the new currency and lifeblood of the economy. It for sure is of the digital economy. And data is literally everywhere. Think about it, the amount of data that people give on social media. They'll give up information about themselves to take a quiz to determine what Disney princess they are. They'll post information about their political views, about their gender, their age, their family, their friends, their likes and their dislikes out on social media. My husband has a watch that tells him his sleeping habits, his exercise goals, if he's holding his breath for too long. Even within our home, heck, we have a refrigerator now that basically, tells me when I'm running low on certain items in my refrigerator and gives me opportunities for the lowest price at supermarkets that are around my house. And finally, my car sends data and information, emails to me all the time, letting me know when I need service on my car or that I was driving too fast or tailgating. So data has proliferated, our everyday lives. What do we really think has caused kind of some of this proliferation of data? I would contend it's 2 things. One is that the cost of storage for keeping all this data has significantly decreased over the last 20 years. And secondly, I would say it's the idea of big data. So big data has kind of been a conversation that's gone around in kind of the MarTech, AdTech ecosystems for about the past 20 years. And I will say it was the idea of using as much data as you could for efficiencies within your organization, for personalization, for reduction of costs. But with the idea of gathering all this data, no one really stopped to think how that data could be used. And so it was really people gorging themselves on trying to get, for many years, as much data as they possibly could, even if they weren't exactly sure how or why they were going to be using it, just that they wanted more of it so that they could continue to do analytics or keeping it in case they needed it. And I would contend even that, some of what came out of GDPR and CCPA is a direct kind of response to this kind of gorging of the data that had happened for years. I would say, secondly, I would say that legislation's not going away. Prior to GDPR, privacy was something that was kind of a nice to have. Most companies didn't have a department or lots of dedicated resources to it. Things related to privacy were basically self-regulated by companies or driven by self-regulated industry groups. But GDPR really codified and elevated privacy from kind of a nice to have to a must have. In fact, I would contend that it's table stakes. So whether you are a B2B business or a B2C business, for B2B, your clients are going to come to you. They're going to, ask you, in RFPs and RFIs, can you tell me about your privacy program? Can you tell me about the training and education? Can you prove to me that you are CCPA compliant or GDPR compliant? And for consumers, if you have a B2C company, I would contend that you're not going to get loyal customers or a larger share of wallet if you cannot create consumer trust with them as to how you're using their data and make them feel comfortable and confident in that. So as we talked about before, GDPR made privacy a kind of regulatory obligation. And in my opinion, it elevated privacy to the executive level because now there are fines associated with not being compliant. So all this to say, privacy isn't going away. It's not a flash in the pan. It's not a bright, shiny object that's going to disappear, but it's going to continue for a while. And we've even seen this in the number of privacy professionals. I think it's grown like 200% just in the last couple of years. As many of y'all know, January 1st, 2020, CCPA, or the California Consumer Privacy Act, went into effect. On November 3rd, California voters, so that would be all of you here in attendance, will be voting on a ballot initiative called Proposition 24, or as many refer to it as CCPA 2.0. And basically it gives additional rights to consumers as well as additional obligations to businesses and companies. On top of that, there's 15 states, including Washington and Texas, just to name a couple, that have some type of privacy bill in state legislation. And then we continue to have talks about a federal privacy bill. Obviously, that's not the most important thing in government right now, but it's definitely top of mind, and people are talking about it. And then I would say, thirdly, consumer sentiment. So as we talked about, the CPRA ballot is on the initiative. The CPRA is a ballot initiative. And right now it is polling at 80% approval rate. But I will go ahead and encourage each of you to, at your Thanksgiving table this year, next month, is to bring up something related to privacy, because I will contend that it'll be a very lively conversation, because people feel very strongly kind of about their privacy rights. I do think one thing that is interesting about the strong views that people take is that what they demonstrate that they want and their consumer behavior differs from sentiment. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that we've had CCPA and GDPR in existence for a while now, and what we have seen is that the number of people that are actually exercising their privacy rights are a lot lower than I think what people had anticipated. And I'm not exactly sure the reason why on that. I have a couple of kind of ideas or themes in my mind, but one of them being, I wonder if the legislation that we've put in place surrounding privacy has actually met the needs of what consumers want. I contend, is it too difficult for consumers to exercise because they have to go individually to each company that they're interacting with to do that? Is it really more of a political issue and less of a consumer issue? Or 4, is there really just a dichotomy between, actualization and what consumers are really saying that they want? And like I said, I do believe that there's a dichotomy between what consumers say and really how this plays out. In fact, 91% of consumers will tell you that they expect a personalized shopping experience. And so they will actually say that they will stop shopping with a company if they don't give them a unique and personalized experience, meaning understanding who they are, giving them relevant content and making them want to buy. Yet at the same time, they have strong views about privacy and don't want to share their data. And so those two views are kind of opposed to one another. Other ways that I think about it, and I'll just kind of give you some personal examples, is, my mother is 76 years old, and I kind of talked to her a little bit about privacy. And when I talk to her about privacy and sharing of her data, she just has a fundamental distrust. And that distrust is compounded by like a fear of a data breach. So she's very skeptical of sharing her data. In fact, she's gone as far as to opt out of a lot of places because she doesn't want to share her data. But then the flip side of that is she'll call me back and say, oh my gosh, I'm still getting advertisements from this company, or I still continue to get a plethora of advertisements. And my response to her is that you will always continue to get advertisements, because that is how retail and others get more clients, what you actually have opted out of is targeted personalized advertising. So you've moved from getting advertisements that maybe meet your particular interests or needs. So for instance, I live in Colorado and have 4 kids and married and a female, and there's certain things that I might be interested in because of those factors, where my experience can be personalized based off of previous purchase decisions or whatever. That will no longer happen, but I will still continue to get mass advertisements out there. So I think there is a misunderstanding about that as well. I also have a 22-year-old godchild, and when I talk to her about privacy, she's very nonchalant about it and basically says she has no problem sharing her data because she's kind of lived in this information and digital technology and is used to sharing everything across there. One of the things that she will say when I talk to her about what is she sharing and does she understand is that she doesn't read anything. And so she has no idea what she is agreeing to or what she's adhered to when she clicks any of these privacy policies or accept buttons. But what I can tell you is that both my mom and my goddaughter do have a couple of themes of what they care about. And I think we should pay attention to those. And what those are is they want to have control of their data. They want to have transparency in what's actually being collected. And they want to have the ability to make a choice about that. But most importantly, they want a value exchange. And some of the research that has happened basically says that 79% of individuals are willing to share data if they feel like they're getting a benefit from it. So based off of these 3 truths, I really believe they're the drivers for the creation of kind of a privacy by design program. And so I feel very strongly that companies that deal with, individual data and household data must have a data privacy and security program, that it should build trust with individuals, and that it should reduce risk for individuals as well as for organizations, and that it should outline a clear value exchange. And finally, I would say it needs to be iterative. Privacy is not static and it's not a one size fits all. Each company is going to kind of employ things differently and will have a different risk appetite for what they are comfortable with based off of the industry they're in, public sentiment, and based off the types of data that you have and how you keep that data. Again, I would say a privacy program is living, it's evolving, it's changing based off of new laws and regulations, based off of new innovations and technologies like fingerprinting, machine learning, artificial intelligence. And I would say it's also changing based off of public sentiment, and it gets changed based off of, how things are enforced by governing bodies like the FTC and AGs and governing bodies such as that. So I will tell you, when developing products, you must have a value exchange and you must have a consent mechanism built in. I think we need to describe what we're doing and what we're collecting and the purposes for how we're doing that. And we need to make this a clear and understandable language. I think we must be committed to ensuring the personal information that we're entrusted with is being protected, and that we should only use it in ways that the consumer consented to or makes logical sense. What I mean by makes logical sense is there was kind of an article and kind of a scandal that happened with a flashlight company. So it was an app that you could put on your phone, which was a flashlight. But that company that did that app was not only giving you the flashlight for free, but they were collecting your location information and selling it. And I would say that the average consumer and the average person would not expect that their flashlight application was actually using precise geo to track them and then selling that information. So that's the type of thing that breaks trust and creates harms. So let's talk about kind of how we kind of set this foundation I, again, believe that the solution to all of this is creating a privacy and security design framework. And I will say, as we talked about before, that privacy has not been around for tons of years. And so we are in the process of having kind of frameworks designed out there for us. They're not as concrete as like what you see in security, which has been around for a few more years, but there are definitely some out there. Probably the most talked about one right now is NIST, but there's also the ISO and the PMF. And what I would basically say to you is look at the various frameworks out there, take what makes sense to you, take what makes sense for your business, and create something for yourself. I think maybe over time, one of the frameworks that I've described might come into more forbearance, and then you can also look at that. But I would say at LiveRamp, our program is based off of, creating policies, reducing risk, and governance. And our governance team is comprised of legal, security, our data ethics privacy team, internal audit, as well as our compliance teams. But when you are kind of setting things up, I kind of think about it in a 3-tier approach. And the way that I think about it is privacy at the foundation. Privacy is centered on how and why data is being used, kind of via the kind of data management philosophy and the policies surrounding that data management. So I would say, privacy is about using data responsibly and in accordance with the wishes of an individual. Then I would say after your foundation of privacy and thinking about it, you want to just add on security as the second layer. And security basically focuses on access of the data. So it's essentially about how the data within your organization is being protected and the controls for protecting that. What I can tell you is privacy and security, I believe, are very different. They have different philosophies. They are both about risk mitigation, but they are different. But I believe many companies confuse them or conflate them together, and definitely consumers get confused. I believe that some of this confusion can be partially attributed to GDPR, which basically kind of meshed multiple kind of security principles into GDPR. I would say that gets compounded by the idea that when surveyed, 20% of companies actually have their privacy department reporting into their security department. But mostly, I would say, I think it has to do with the idea that what is mostly publicized is the idea of data breaches and data incidents. And these are all over the news. I would say there's at least 20 different data breaches that happen to companies every year. Some of them you hear about more than others. I would say the most recent one was that got a lot of news coverage and media attention was the Equifax one. But I will say that data breaches, I would contend, are really security events. But they definitely have privacy aspects to them, and privacy must be involved in them. I would say that, when you have a data breach or a data incident, you should definitely have your governance council involved in that. You need to have security there to understand how the breach occurred, how they got access, what systems were compromised. You need to have legal there to understand your legal obligations. And you definitely have to have data ethics and privacy there so that you can understand what data was exposed, what type of data it was, and then be able to map it back to what laws could have been compromised there, and then who do you need to reach out to? What governing bodies do you need to let know that this has occurred? And then finally, after you have your kind of privacy and security, I would say you layer on top of that data ethics. And in my mind, data ethics stands on the shoulders of data privacy and security. It's kind of the gap between having the right to do something and doing the right thing. It's kind of the relationship between what I would call like law and ethics. At LiveRamp, my team is the data ethics team, and our edict is basically the ethical use of personal information or personal data. And I see data ethics come into play a lot, and mostly in terms of innovation, where I see data and technology kind of collide. And here, ethics has to take the forefront because there are no laws or regulations, because these are new and emerging. And as we know, laws have a difficult time keeping up with the pace of technology. So a couple of weeks ago, I was watching the movie Jurassic Park. I don't know how many of y'all remember that movie. It's pretty old these days, but I was watching it with my son. And in this movie, Ian Malcolm, who's played by a gentleman by the name of Jeff Goldblum, says, "Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should." For those of you who haven't seen the movie, when he made this statement, he was referring to the cloning of dinosaurs. But I think this quote really resonates in terms of how data is used in new and emerging technologies, and just in technology in general. I think we always need to be thinking about unintended consequences of the technology and the data that's used for that, and personal harms that could actually come to individuals. And when I say we need to be thinking about that, I don't mean that the data ethics or privacy department needs to be thinking about that. I mean, we collectively, as a society, but then kind of bringing that in more towards anyone that's within your company who's touching data. So that's everyone, from the data scientists to the product people, to our testers, to our engineering department. They all need to be thinking about that as they're developing and building products. And I would say the practice of privacy and security by design is a necessary process of embedding good privacy practices into design specifications, into our business practices, and into our infrastructure. And again, this means developing and embedding data ethics across the company. Our products should be designed with privacy in mind and not as an afterthought. So when building upon your program, I think you should start really on three main areas, and that is the data foundation, the data regulations, and communication and transparency. And I think you build off of these three concepts. But again, as we talked about before, remember and recognize that this is a journey and an iterative process, and it will continue to change over time. So I would say, in my opinion, the foundation of any data privacy program is your data. And you should conduct an audit of all the data that is kept in your company, keeping in mind that the data is the foundation for you understanding and responding to data access requests, so that you can be compliant with GDPR and CCPA. So as you are trying to create your data foundation, there's a couple of questions that I think you should ask yourself. So again, you have data in your company, you want to assess it, what do you do? The first thing you should do is ask these questions, and that is, what data do you have in your organization? What of that data is personal information? What of that data can be linked together to create personal information or create it to be unique where you need to protect it? Where is this data coming from? Is it coming from your website? Is it coming from your call center? Is it coming from your fulfillment centers? Is it coming from your social apps? Is it coming from emails? Are you purchasing this data from third-party aggregators or data brokers? Are you getting this information shared to you from clients? All of these things you should be thinking about. Then you should be thinking about what systems and where are they housed within your corporation. And then you need to think about who has access to that data. Are there various groups within the organization that have access to it? Are those groups who have access to that data, how is that data stored? Is it stored aggregated? Is it encrypted? Are you storing it hashed? And then on top of that, again, thinking about who has access to it. Are you having people from other countries have access to your data? Are you transferring it back and forth? Because if you are, then you need to be thinking about a data transfer mechanism and what mechanism that you would be using. After that, you need to be thinking about how do you maintain your data and update it, and how often are you updating it? Then you need to think about the privacy principle of data retention, meaning how long are you keeping it and what is your process for destroying it? And finally, I would say you also need to think about whether or not you need this data, which is really a data minimization privacy principle, which is the idea of limiting the data that you collect. You need to consider the business justification for each and every piece of data that you have, and think about it not only from just that data, but what comes through in a payload, in your metadata, in your log data, looking at all of that. And again, could that be linked together and how is it stored? And I would advise don't collect data that you don't need, because remember, the more data that you have, the more exposure that you will have during a breach. Secondly, I would say understand your global regulations. What I mean by that is that now you've collected all this data and now you've created a data mapping for all of your data and a data inventory with where it's going, who's it going to. Now you understand that data, you can apply the regulations that are out there. And with data privacy, the laws vary from state to state and country to country, and even change. Are you based on industry? So for instance, are you taking in PHI where you have to contend with HIPAA, or are you taking in financial information where you have to care about FCRA and GLBA? Are you taking in children information so you have to contend with COPPA? Or is your marketing department doing anything with emails where you have to care about spam? So if you have your inventory, you'll be able to understand and apply if those laws match your data, and so that you can respond to regulators and others in the industry. Again, we talked about before, there's 15 states that have, something related to privacy laws and legislation. We've got federal legislation, and we have other countries continuing to look at, expanding their privacy laws as well. Canada just recently, Brazil, things of that nature. And I also think it's important to understand the themes or the trends that are out there in privacy. One of them, in my opinion, is limiting the use and collection of sensitive PI. So think of sensitive PI as being like biometric information, precise geolocation, credit card information, social security type information. And the second one being kind of broad consumer rights, such as access and deletion, opt-out, portability, and the ability to correct your data. But basically what you should take from this is that you should build your program with the idea of a holistic approach, a global approach, and not do it piecemeal by piecemeal. And finally, I would say privacy is a business imperative in terms of being transparent both internally and externally. Internally, you must ensure that privacy is something that's embedded across your company, that it's not just limited to the privacy organization, but that everyone in the organization understands when to come to you and why that they should care. Data touches so many different departments and organizations. HR is touching employee data, marketing's touching loyalty data. Data scientists are doing analysis on data, creating products out of that. Your product teams looking at data, your engineering teams dealing with data. You're not trying to get all these teams to become privacy experts, but you do want them to know what they should care about and who to reach out to and why to reach out and what some of the general obligations are. Actually, a fun fact, January 28th every year is Privacy Day. So that's a good way to kind of create that, that awareness within your company. Secondly, you need to create the awareness with external clients as well. So you need to be transparent with your consumers and your privacy notices. You need to update those, and they need to be accurate. So if you take in new data sources or you start combining different types of data, you're using them for brand new purposes, you need to update your privacy policy, and everything you say that you're going to be doing in there, you should be compliant and you should actually do. So let's talk really quickly about, how we do this at LiveRamp and some real world examples. One of the first thing I would say is that being accountable is really very important. And the philosophy that we've adopted at LiveRamp, um, that's the philosophy that we've adopted at LiveRamp. And I would say that as part of our privacy and security by design approach, we ensure every LiveRamp product at every stage is built with privacy in mind. So how does that really look at LiveRamp? How do we actually do that? And I would say what we do is on our data ethics team, we have someone on our data ethics teams assigned to a product line of business. So those product owners as well as those engineers, and it's their responsibility to work hand in hand with that product team and those engineers, understanding the product inside and out so that we can apply the various laws and philosophies to that product. We're also trying to do it at the beginning of the product lifecycle throughout the entire process. That way, product and engineering don't feel like privacy is just a checkbox or something that they have to do before they go into production, but that we are collaborators with them and that our success is their success in helping them build products that do have privacy at the forefront of it. Secondly, we use different techniques for de-identification of personal information and pseudonymization techniques. So we use encryption and hashing and salting. We use anonymization. We aggregate our information so that it's safer. Thirdly, I would say we conduct what are called privacy impact assessments, or PIAs, for all of our products and services, which is basically an assessment of the risk associated with using personal data. And then we find ways to reduce those risks, whether those are by technical controls or legal controls. And finally, privacy can be very broad and open to interpretation. Think about CCPA. There's many people who can't agree on the interpretation of just the word sell in there. And so what we at LiveRamp do is we sit on many boards within the digital ecosystem, like the IAB and the ANA, and we try to get a pulse on what others are doing and then also bring our viewpoint forward into those conversations. And then I also think there's always a feedback loop with your clients or with your consumers. So finally, what are the four things?
Just wanted to, a quick reminder, we have about 4 minutes left.
Perfect, thank you. I'll wrap this up because I think I obviously was a little long-winded, guys. I apologize. The four things I want you to walk away with here or remember is that you need to have a framework and you need to operationalize it, and it needs to be accountable. I would say you need everyone in your organization to kind of buy into this. I would say, how do you get that buy-in? You get it from the top first. At LiveRamp, I know one of our core pillars is privacy, and we show that commitment by when anybody onboards, we have a training about privacy, how to contact us, and why is it important. And we also require everyone to do CCPA and GDPR training when they onboard, just because we want them to understand that this is a core tenet for us. I would also say the third thing is you want to stay up to date with privacy regulations, and you want to build towards tomorrow. You don't want to just build for the regulation that is here today, because as we've talked about, this is very much an emerging area that's continually changing. And finally, I would say you want to build your products that rely and think about privacy and security and data ethics as a tenant that's built in, not something that's thought about at the very end as a checkbox, but that's really built into the DNA and the life and the blood of your products. And so with that, apologies that I ran long. It seems like we probably only have 2 or 3 minutes for questions, but if anybody has any questions. So one of the questions is, what are some of the innovative approaches that companies have implemented to address privacy and security issues? I would say really that's by doing privacy embedding privacy embedded technologies into their services. So what I mean by that is you're actually embedding technologies within what you're building that then makes it easier for the consumer to make choices, to opt out, to consent to different things. And I would also say that, again, it's built into the product, so it makes it easy to use. Right now, I think a lot of the friction that we see is that, again, privacy is something that's thought of as an afterthought or an add-on. And so it is not readily built in and not easy to consume.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa, for the awesome presentation. Appreciate all the attendees for joining us. Please contact the speaker if you have any questions regarding this topic. Please do provide your comments and feedback to us or the organizers on the community board, or start a discussion there to connect with others in the DataCon LA 2020 community. Thank you for joining today's presentation. I hope you gain a lot of useful insights from this session. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you again for being part of this year's DataCon LA.